Let's talk fascism. You know, the merger of corporate and state interests combined with belligerent nationalism. All right. Washington Post is reporting that a group of conservative, a group of conservative groups, all of them funded by right-wing billionaire interests, the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, Freedom Works, the Conservative Action Project, the Leadership Institute, and apparently dozens of other conservative groups are all getting together to petition Republicans in Congress to stop negotiating with Democrats to raise taxes, or excuse me, this isn't even about raising taxes on corporations and rich people. It's about giving the IRS enough money so the Internal Revenue Service agents can actually audit the tax, very, very complex, you know, Byzantine, labyrinthine tax returns like Donald Trump's, for example, with, you know, he's got 800 different companies. This is what Enron did. Enron had 120 some odd companies. And if they had money they were losing money in one division, they would just move that loss over to another division, take it as a tax loss, then move that tax loss. You know, this is what Trump does. This is companies all across America do this, and especially billionaires. And, you know, they have put together this letter, basically, to the groups. The letter says that Republicans should not negotiate with the White House, that's with President Biden, unless they agree to, and I'm quoting from the letter, no additional funding for the Internal Revenue Service. Now, prior to the Reagan administration, we had pretty good and pretty reasonable enforcement of the tax code in the United States. Reagan cut the budget for the Internal Revenue Service. George W. Bush cut the budget for the Internal Revenue Service. Donald Trump dramatically cut the budget for the Internal Revenue Service. And as a result, the IRS now, if you use inflation-adjusted dollars, is running at less than half the budget that they were when Reagan came into office. And without inflation-adjusted dollars, it's still a substantial cut from where it was back then. And the result of that is that the IRS today is more likely to audit a person who makes $50,000 to $100,000 a year and has a home office than they are to audit a billionaire or a giant corporation. It's just they've just basically given up on it. And so these right-wing groups now are reaching out and saying, hey, no more funding for the IRS. Now, these are supposed to be political groups that are interested in freedom. Freedom apparently means the freedom not to pay your taxes and to get away with cheating on your taxes, as Donald Trump has done for 40 years. And as many of these corporations have been doing, well, actually, Trump has been probably doing it more than 40 years, but many of these corporations have been doing it since the initial Reagan administration, the Reagan Revolution war on the Internal Revenue Service, followed by, you know, a war on the middle class. Let's raise the taxes of middle-class people. You know, if you're earning under $100,000 or under $200,000 a year, if you're in the bottom 90% of Americans, you know, odds are you're paying about twice in actual real taxes from what your parents did or your grandparents did just back in the 70s or the 40s. And unless you're a billionaire, in which case you're paying 1 or 2 or 3% maximum income taxes on your income and revenues. And the rest of us are picking up the slack. And corporations, you know, the top 400 corporations in America, I think it was 80, maybe 90 of them paid nothing in taxes. Many of them are getting money back every year. The Washington Post has an op-ed by Greg Sargent today. An ugly new right-wing attack, this is what they're talking about, is this attack on funding the IRS, poses a test for populists like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, of course, the guy who wrote Hillbilly Elegy. He's what you might call a moderate Republican, and he's running for Rob Portman's seat in Ohio for that Senate seat. And, you know, basically what Greg Sargent is saying to him is, here's a chance to break with your crazy right-wing funders. Will he do it? Well, increasingly, if you want to be successful as a Republican, you have to go along with the right-wing billionaires. Because if you don't, and Donald Trump is one of them, of course, If you don't, they will fund your primary opponents and you will lose the primary. And because gerrymandering is so well entrenched and such an important part of Republican governing strategy, it's the way they continue to maintain power. It's why, for example, in Wisconsin, in the last 2 elections, more people voted for Democrats to go to the House of Representatives than voted for Republicans. And yet, the majority of the Wisconsin delegation to Congress is Republican. The same thing happened in Kentucky, I believe. Maybe it was Tennessee. The same thing happened in Michigan. The same thing happened in Pennsylvania. State after state, you've got a majority of elected officials who are Republicans, yet a majority of the people voted for Democrats. This is, gerrymandering on steroids. So, and who helped set this up? It's all these state policy networks. Where do these state policy networks come from? These are local right-wing groups that produce opinion papers and host events, pass out millions and millions of dollars, help get people elected to the state House of Representatives, the state Senate, the state Assembly, whatever it may be called in your particular state. These are all, most of them anyway, outgrowths of the old Koch network, again, the old billionaire network. Meanwhile, you've got giant corporations who never were political before 1971, before Lewis Powell published his infamous memo in which he said, hey, corporate America, we need to take over politics, we need to take over the media, we need to take over our schools, we need to take over colleges, particularly political science and economic courses. We need to do this, we need to do it now because Ralph Nader and Rachel Carlson are gunning for us. And it's literally what he said. Well, I shouldn't say literally. It's metaphorically what he said. He named, actually it's literal that he named Ralph Nader and he named Rachel Carlson, or Carson, whichever it is, in his memo and said that, they're promoting this whole Marxist idea of government regulation. And indeed, in the 1960s and 1970s, Ralph Nader with his book Unsafe at Any Speed and Rachel Carlson with her book Silent Spring, both, I think they were 65 and 67 or 67 and 69. Those 2 books kicked off a consumer movement and an environmental movement in the United States. And by 71, Lewis Powell was looking at this, a tobacco lawyer, by the way, totally freaked out and said, no, we've got to seize control of this political system. The next year, Richard Nixon put him on the Supreme Court. 4 years later, the Supreme Court rules, hey, if a billionaire wants to own a politician, that's not corruption, that's not bribery, that's free speech. Money is speech. 2 years later, in 78, with the Bellotti decision, they doubled down on that and said, oh, and that applies to corporations as well. And so now you've got corporations all across America that back after January 6th said, we will never again give money to those 147 Republicans who voted with the guys who were trying to overthrow our republic. We'll never do it again. And in less than 2 months, AT&T and Cigna and Intel, Laura Clausen blogging about this over at Daily Kos, by the way, big corporations claimed they'd stop giving to Republicans who tried to overturn the election. They lied. Walmart, General Electric, Pfizer, all these companies, they're all supporting the insurrectionists again. They said what they thought would make them look good back in January, but hey, it's a corporation. Their loyalty isn't to democracy. If anything, they don't like democracy. Democracy means that the people come first. They would far prefer an authoritarian oligarchy, where the oligarchs come first, the billionaires, the big corporations, the people who have the money, the old golden rule. Whoever has the gold gets to make the rules. That's what they want. And as I said, Benito Mussolini, or at least Giovanni Gentile, his ghostwriter, referred to this as, he said, fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism, for it's basically the merger of corporate and state interests. And that's what we have right now. And it is getting worse. And now there's a bunch of Republicans that are going to have to face some serious choice. And some Democrats as well. Now, particularly now that the head lobbyist for Exxon has said that, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin and Chris Coons and John Tester are all in his back pocket. Each one of them. I hope that they will step up and say, no, we're not in the back pocket of Exxon. At least not anymore.